Welcome, my name's Carl. I'm the editor-in-chief here at W Media, and I'm delighted to be joined today by author and renowned industry expert, David Linthicum. Hi, David. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be here. Great talking to you.
Thank you. So we're going to be mainly talking about the cloud today, but perhaps we can start by just having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, I guess, probably most accurately defined as a cloud subject matter expert, industry insider, technical influencer. I have typical 7 jobs. I have 70 classes out on LinkedIn Learning. I teach at LSU. I consult to the Global 2000 companies. I'm a book author. I've written 17 books, including my latest, Cloud Computing Insider, which is sitting over my shoulder. And just became a YouTuber last week. So there's that. So that's pretty much sums me up.
Okay, very nice. Um, so moving straight into it then, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but there seems to be maybe two paradoxical trends in the cloud industry at the moment. On the one hand, there's obviously a global shift towards digital transformation, cloud implementation, even growing interest in talk about super cloud. And then on the other side, though, you have people saying, and there's a growing trend towards data repatriation and right sizing. Do you think that's a fair assessment? And if so, why do you think, or what are the trends that you think are making these grow at the same time?
Yeah, I think that is a fair assessment. It's a good observation. I think it's being driven by the fact that on-premise hardware has gotten much cheaper. And you got to remember that cloud digital transformation doesn't always need to include the cloud. It just means becoming better at being digitally enabled. And whether that's on-premise and edge computing, mobile computing, wristwatch, it doesn't matter. Obviously, in the last 10 years, everybody was making a purposeful move into the cloud, not a centralization of resources. We're going to eventually all be in the cloud, that kind of stuff. And I think I think people are asking proper questions now. So in other words, it seems to be expensive, more expensive than they thought it was. What I write about in my book is normally 2.5 times what people thought it was going to cost them. So there's some cost issues there. The stuff on premise has gotten way cheaper in the last 10 years. So that's kind of blowing a hole in the whole cloud computing mix. And also the fact of the matter is we're moving into kind of a ubiquitous state where it doesn't really matter where you host your data and host your applications. We'll be able to leverage it wherever you want to put it. So we're not forcing relocation to different platforms. In many instances, we're leveraging data where it exists. And so the right sizing that you see now is really undoing mistakes that probably people made in moving into the cloud, probably didn't understand how much it was going to cost. They didn't invest in refactoring or remodeling their systems. So it was able to take advantage and optimize in the cloud spaces they were in. And also really kind of movement to the business and the fact that we have high-speed networks, work everywhere, 5G is pervasive, Elon Musk's satellite internet access is a real thing now. And so we're not necessarily forced into always going to cloud. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, people always pushed me and said, well, cloud advocate Dave Linthicum. I never was a cloud advocate. I was always an architectural advocate and finding the best processes to make it happen. And so sort of the rethinking of this right now, I think is a healthy thing. The ability to kind of look at what platforms are going to best serve the business. And I think that's what you're seeing now. Digital transformation is still occurring. It's just not always occurring on cloud. And the right sizing we're seeing and also the lack of even demigration from the cloud is just a reaction to the cost trends that we're seeing, hardware, software versus what the cloud says.
Okay, so AI, of course, is the buzzword of the day, not just in our industry, but across different areas. I'll start by asking you a broad question. How much of that do you think is hype or maybe eagerness for this new technology? And how much of it do you think is actually taking place right now and actually being implemented right now?
Yeah, not as much as people think. Having a look inside the enterprises and see what they're actually doing. There's certainly a lot of prototyping going on and a lot of proof of concepts going on and a lot of strategies going on. And I'm involved in some of those, but there's not a lot of actually building of generative AI systems where people are, training models or train with their business data. They are using generative AI systems to take on tactical roles, the ability to do credit checks and pick stocks and all these sorts of things that we find that generative AI as it comes in to do. But it's very tactical usage. So there's not a lot of game-changing generative AI building that's occurring within enterprises now. They certainly are talking about it, and they're going to conferences, and all the cloud conferences have become generative AI conferences in the last 6 months. But there will be, I think will be a transition to people adopting this technology. In some instances, for businesses, it's going to be game changing. They'll be able to provide a better, more innovative experience versus their competitors by weaponizing this technology. And I think they see that. They just don't quite know how to go about it, how to build those systems. And also the thing I always bring up, how are you going to pay for it? Because it's very expensive, very process intensive. It's going to burn a lot of power. We have to look at the sustainability aspect of it. So there's a lot of questions we haven't answered yet. Other than the fact we know it's cool, we probably know we're going to have some systems there. What those systems are, what the purpose is, how they're going to serve the business, I think remains to be seen.
Okay, I mean, you say game changing. This is a bit of a big question then, but how do you think AI will be shaping the cloud industry in the coming years then?
I think that obviously it's going to be the preferred resource in many instances to run the AI business. Of course, we just discussed the fact that many instances on-premise systems are going to be more cost effective. And so not all generative AI systems are going to sit in the cloud. Some of them are going to reside on premise for lots of reasons, including the fact that it's a core system to the business and they want to keep it in house. But generative AI eats a lot of resources, eats a lot of storage, eats a lot of processing power. Not only just processing power, but specialized processors like GPUs and TPUs, which we have a shortage of right now. So when people are building these systems, at least the initial prototypes or the initial tactical systems we just talked about, I think most of those are going to be built in the cloud because the cloud is going to be the most convenient way to do that. They have the generative AI systems already pre-installed. They have the ability to do data. They have the processors on demand. I can scale it up or scale it down, with the swipe of a mouse. So it's going to be easier to do. But as far as the long-term cost effectiveness of that, very much like the discussion we just had, there may be some right-sizing questions are going to be asked in terms of where these things should reside. I do think that generative AI systems, the majority of them, are going to be complex distributed systems with data residing, training data and output data residing everywhere. And so they're just going to layer into cloud, but they're also going to layer into a mesh of complex technologies that exist on premise, exist in the cloud, exist on the edge, mobile computing, all these sorts of things that are starting to emerge. So it's going to be moving into a mess of an architecture, I guess is the best way to put it. We're going to have a heterogeneous systems that running everywhere. Generative AI systems is going to do that. Cloud's going to participate in that game, probably a larger share, but they're not going to be everything in terms of providing the platforms for generative AI, but they're going to grow like crazy just because it's the most convenient way to do it. People are always looking for the path of least resistance. They don't understand a lot about this technology now or even how much it costs. So I think the first generations of the generative AI systems, probably the majority of them are going to reside in the cloud.
Okay. I mean, this might be a big question, but obviously you touched on some of the issues facing the industry there coming along. Is there anything that you think the industry should be doing or preparing, kind of how these issues can be addressed, or is it we just have to wait and see?
I think we should do some planning. There's that P word again. People don't have an understanding of how much this stuff's going to cost or where it's going to reside. And, my advice to my clients is to do some advanced planning in terms of what are the use cases that we're able to use that are able to leverage AI to a business value and which ones are not. And what do those migrations look like? How do we deal with security? How do we deal with governance? How do we deal with regulations? How do we deal with ethical concerns, which are always coming up with AI? And I think we need to have more of those discussions now. People are getting into the viability of the tools and this cloud vendor versus this cloud vendor. I don't think those are the discussions that are healthy for us. I think it is creating an overall strategy so we figure out the business processes we need to adapt to AI, reasons to do it, and also reasons not to do it. And everybody's kind of in a big race now. Everybody's AI washing all their technology. I notice all the resumes I see are all AI enabled now if they're not written by AI. And so everybody's all in on what the technology can do. There are just no detailed strategies and planning that are occurring at the rate it really should be occurring based on the potential for this technology and based on its ability to impact businesses either negatively or positively.
Okay. Moving away from AI then, the other big issue, obviously, is sustainability, again, facing our industry and globally anyway. There are obvious concerns that growing cloud usage, data center bills, all this kind of stuff is going to make it even more difficult for the industry to remain sustainable in the future. So let me start by asking you, what do you think the industry is getting right when it comes to sustainability right now? And then do you think it can maintain or even improve that as growth and digital transformation continues?
I think what it's getting right is having the right intentions. Everybody I talk to obviously is for sustainability and making sure we minimize the damage to the planet that can be done. What they don't seem to be getting right is how they implement it. So they're talking about sustainability, probably working on their ESG scores, but as far as tactics to get to a sustainable posture, at least as far as IT goes, people aren't practicing what they preach. So we have, massive data centers that are running massive amounts of hardware that consume a massive amount of power. And if you look at each one of the individual servers that they're running and powering, they're usually at 3 to 5%. They're not being utilized. And of course, cloud solves some of that. But people are at us, 30%, 35% migration in the cloud, have the cloud data there. And even on the cloud systems, we're using them in an optimized way. So in many instances, we're allocating cloud resources, which are cool because they're shareable, but we're running them and not leveraging them. So it's functionally equivalent to us plugging in a server in a data center and just letting it run there for a year. So the under optimization of the resources that are on premise and under optimization of resources in the cloud are vastly underappreciated in what we need to be doing. And it's kind of funny to me. I'll drive up to a company that will have electric car chargers and solar panels on the roof, and talk to me about their ESG score. And I look at their infrastructure, and they're wasting probably 85% of the power that's not being utilized for any kind of business purpose. And we have to get into a state where we're looking at the optimization of these technologies. And I think if we just do better at building systems that burn less power and designing systems that burn less power and optimizing existing resources, we'll trim a lot of it off. And I think people just don't realize it yet. We have a tendency to, I think in the right way, which is good. Everybody has good intentions, but we're not executing on the back end.
Okay, so planning is the thing that we're getting right, but the actual implementation is still a bit short. I mean, how much do you think government or politicians or legislation, regulations should or could be involved with this helping, or is it for the industry to sort itself out and kind of move ahead with the things that it knows it should be doing?
Yeah, I think regulations just confuse things and get in the way. You've got to remember regulations are nation dependent. So we can't do a regulation across the world. So it's UK, EU, United States, Asia. So really it's incentives in terms of the business to wanting to do this that's going to add value to the business. The great thing about sustainability, if you go to a more sustainable infrastructure, it's also a more optimized and business value generating infrastructure. So they solves the same problem. So it's businesses really kind of understanding that they're leaving money on the table in terms of not optimizing these systems and start moving in those directions. I think we're seeing, and we saw this in 2023, besides the generative AI boom, we're hearing the optimization word in many instances in the cloud conferences and finally talking about that after 15 years. So I will think it is getting into common control planes, the ability to abstract heterogeneity, the ability to have common monitoring systems, all these sorts of things to get to a more optimized state, which is where sustainability needs to be. And it's okay to have electric car chargers and solar panels on your roof, but you're not solving real problems until you figure out how to cut the majority of the power consuming systems that you're running as a business.
Okay. So when talking about digital transformation and cloud implementation, cybersecurity inevitably gets brought up. What are some of the key ways that you think the industry can address or does address cybersecurity concerns? And what do you think the role of FinOps would be in this, or could be?
That's a great question. I think ultimately it's the ability to understand that the attack vectors are going to be changing a great deal over the next few years. Hackers don't have the same sort of an adoption curve as enterprises do in leveraging generative AI and systems that can be weaponized. And so we're going to see some very creative hacks that occur that are largely generated to the access to almost free generative AI systems. And I don't think enterprises, most part, are prepared to defend against them. So it's the ability to weaponize Gen AI on our side to defend against the Gen AI attacks that are occurring. They're going to come at us in multiple dimensions. So the phishing attacks and the ransomware attacks and the man in the middle attacks, all these sorts of things that were very difficult to pull off just a few years ago and even this year are going to be very easy to pull off by bad actors in the States. And there's a lot to be gained. People are, paying ransoms and there's some upside benefits in making that happen. So I think it's preparing for the fact that the attacks are going to become more creative, more dynamic, and you're going to have to tool up to, defend yourself against them right now. FinOps can play a role because I wrote about this in my InfoWorld articles, that ultimately, if we're looking at the metrics within FinOps, it really kind of indicates in many instances that an attack is occurring. So one of the things I did notice when I do a postmortem on a cyber attack is that suddenly their cloud bills, bursted up, for a couple of days before, and no one noticed before they realized they were under attack. Well, the minute that stuff rises, that FinOps system should alert the cyber systems that an attack is likely occurring, and someone needs to defend it and shut down the IP address and do those sorts of things. So it's a meshing of that, the meshing of FinOps with security systems, that in all these sorts of things that really needs to happen. Because I mean, spending too much money is normally an indication that someone's coming after you, and if that's the case, you need to let someone know. In this case, let a system know it's able to defend against it.
Okay, it's a really interesting idea. Um, I guess one last very broad question then to finish us off, and it might be putting you on the spot a little bit, but what do you think a couple of the big trends for the cloud and data center industry may be, say, perhaps this coming year, and maybe ones that aren't getting talked about? We mentioned AI, we mentioned sustainability, obviously everyone talks about them, but what else do you think might be out there?
Yeah, I think it's the move to ubiquitous computing, the ability to just kind of declare, which we should have declared a while ago, that we're going to run all the applications and databases on the systems that are going to be most optimized for in terms of sustainability, cost measures, things like that. So it doesn't matter if it's on cloud or it's on premise or it's on my wristwatch or on my phone. We're going to understand that the new world is going to be heterogeneous. It's going to be complex, and that's a good thing. So we're able to do a lot more with the same amount of resources, just using them in a more optimized way. At the same time, we're going to have to figure out how to operate that complex mess of heterogeneous stuff. So it will be focusing on common control planes. So instead of cloud-based silos in terms of how we do operations and security and governance and FinOps, which is the way we do it now. We use whatever native tools on the particular cloud to do it. And if we have three clouds, we use three sets of tools. The ability to find commonality between them. And of course, the industry is calling it super cloud, meta cloud. I don't really care what you call it. But thinking about solving the problem one time versus solving the problem for every platform you stand up, inclusive to cloud, that's not going to scale from a complexity point of view. And we just talked about cybersecurity. The large vulnerability is going to be this complexity. It's the inability to manage configurations because we have too many moving parts and not enough human beings to configure these moving parts, and we're just going to lose track of stuff. So we have to figure out how to do things that are going to enable us to scale. So I think the cross-platform capabilities, super cloud, meta cloud, and the AI ops play, FinOps, all these sorts of tools kind of layer into that, security managers, is something we have to figure out. I think that's going to be a big push right now. In fact, I was a little halfway disappointed when generative AI kind of inflected, because we were starting to focus on that, and now the resources seem to be moving away from it. But it's a problem we're still going to have to solve. And by solving that, also figure out how we're going to manage these resources where we want to run this generative AI infrastructure. If we're moving that direction, whether we like it or not, and it seems to be the case, how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to make it scale? How are we going to have it in a secure environment? So all that stuff needs to occur right now.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks again for joining us today, David, and thanks for speaking with us.